We shall start with a university. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sah Viryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditamastu ma vidvishavai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Sri Sai Ram. I offer my humble pranams at the divine lotus feet of our master, Bhagavan Sri Satya Sai Baba, who is there with us today in the most beautiful and inspiring form of Sadguru Madhusudan Sai. My humble greetings to the respected Chancellor Sir, Pro-Chancellor Sir, Vice-Chancellor Sir, distinguished leadership of Sri Satya Sai University for Human Excellence, faculty members, students of Gulbarga, Mudaneli and Nalakadanali campus. It is said that if excellence has to happen, it requires two things. One is inspiration, one is platform. Most of the youth in India have a great inspiration to contribute something to India, to contribute for the betterment of the nation, to contribute for the betterment of the society. But there are only few platforms, or there are only few spaces. As a government also provides few spaces so that talent can meet the platform in order to achieve this excellence. With the grace of God and with the blessings of great leaders, Sri Satya Sai University for Human Excellence is one such a novel platform where inspiration is met with full platform, with full facilities in order to achieve human excellence. What world today require is human excellence. Though with this human excellence, we can also achieve the other excellence like academic excellence, research excellence, administrative excellence, and national excellence. But the foundation for all types of excellence is human excellence. Sri Satya Sai University for Human Excellence is one such novel university, as I said previously, which facilitates, which gives opportunities to the students, to the boys and the girls of nation India, irrespective of caste, creed, economical status, in order to achieve this dream, in order to live this dream. The students are not just here to study and get mere degrees, but they are here to learn the leadership skills in order to lead the nation in the front. In these past 1 month, we had great leaders from all the walks of life who have demonstrated great values in their lives and who have contributed greatly to the nation. And this week, we have our loving Durga ma'am, who is there with us. She is such an inspiration. I was just going through her TEDx talks. It was just an inspiration for me. Just a brief intro about Durga ma'am. Durga Shakti Nagpal is an IAS officer of 2010 batch, the Uttar Pradesh cadre. She secured All Indian rank 20 in UPSC examination. Durga Shakti ma'am is known for the most fearless and the strongest action against invincible and dreaded illegal sand miners in her very first posting in Uttar Pradesh in Noida. In her very first posting as SDM Noida, she stood up with the poor villagers who were getting displaced due to the rapidly eroding river bank owing to the rampant illegal mining. She was removed from Noida, which saw national-wide protest against her removal. She was finally reinstated due to the national pressure. Noida episode is perceived to be a victory of oppressed classes against the prevalent corruption and criminalization in politics. Her notable achievements include overhauling of government schools and hospitals, undertaking largest plantation drive in record time, and upscaling national agriculture market, connecting traders and farmers on electronic platform. She has also served as a SDM, Dehat, CDO, Mathura, OSD to Union Agriculture and Farmers Welfare Minister. She has also recently served as a Deputy Secretary in the Department of Commerce in the Government of India. Our Master Bhagwan Sri Satya Sai Baba says that for betterment of the society, for the betterment of nation, three things are important. One is Sarkar, one is Samaj, and one is Samstha. Ma'am, you're a great inspiration as a representative of Sarkar who is doing so much for our nation. And we as a samstha, as an institution, which is also trying for the betterment of the nation, which in collaboration with Samaj, the society, should achieve this excellence. We request ma'am to talk to all of our students and inspire all of them. Thank you. Sai Ram.
Thank you very much for a very, very kind introduction. Om Sai Ram to everybody. With the blessings of Sri Satya Sai Baba, we are all here today. And we are very fortunate to be healthy and happy. Our families, they are healthy. Before we start our topic for today, let's take a moment and thank Baba for keeping us all healthy. Let us also pray to him to shower his blessings to people who are in need, who are in pain, who are in ill health. Baba has been very kind to the entire humanity. Let's pray to him that he bestows upon good health to each and every member of this world. The topic for today is joy of living. So joy of living basically means, how do you live a joyful life? What do you do that you bring happiness to yourself and to the people around you? How do you enter into your future in a promising and a prosperous way? This is what we are going to be talking about today. And I hope that I am able to convey my message in an interesting and a fruitful manner. The joy of living. In my recent TED talk, I said that there is no such thing called hard work. And I think that that is the most important point when you want to be happy in life. There is nothing hard in life. So there is no such thing called hard work. If you love, if you enjoy anything that you do, your daily activities, be it your studies, be it your physical activity, having your meals in time, waking up in time in the morning, going to bed at night in time, interacting, spending time with your family and friends, working for your career. If you derive happiness, if you derive enjoyment, then you wouldn't really feel that you are putting in any hard work, and your life will become joyful. The more heart and soul you put into any task that is at hand, the more joy you would derive. Until now, since our birth and entry into teenagehood, adolescence, all our decisions, or at least most of our decisions, are taken by our parents, our family members, senior people in the family. And many of our decisions have a circumstantial bearing as well. But the stage at which each one of you is right now, that is adulthood. It's a very crucial stage, very important stage. You are far more independent, far more mature, both physically and emotionally, to take your own decisions. Here on, whatever decisions you take will have bearings on two very important factors. The first is, how do you earn for yourself and your family? And what kind of lifestyle, particularly a healthy lifestyle, you live? That is the first factor. The second is, what kind of impact your actions have on the society? What kind of contribution you are able to make to your community, your country, and your world? Sri Satya Sai Baba has beautifully said that there is no caste. There is only one caste, and that is of humanity. There is no religion. There is only one religion, and that is of love. There is no language, but only one language, and that is of the heart. I think this recent pandemic has amply demonstrated Baba's belief in multiple ways. People from different corners of the world have come forward to help others. And they've done this in spite of limited resources. So they've shown that you do not have to be rich to help others. But what you necessarily need is to have a rich heart. People have donated oxygen concentrators, oxygen cylinders. People are donating their blood and plasma. The kind of people in the organizations that have come forward are not who are very well off, but those who have a rich heart, that is to contribute to helping others. Now, there's a very interesting story in this particular context that I'm reminded of. There was once a very rich man. He went for an interview, and the interviewer asked him that you are spending so much of money on charity and philanthropy. You spend billions of dollars and crores of rupees. Do you know anybody who spends more money than you? So that man said that yes. He said that I know someone who spends 10 rupees and is far richer than me in terms of philanthropy, in terms of charity. He spends much more than I am spending by spending just 10 rupees. So the interviewer was puzzled. He said, how is that possible? You are spending to the tune of billions, and you are saying that somebody who spent 10 rupees is richer than you in terms of charity, is spending more. So he said, yes. And he said that, let me tell you how. He said, many years ago, I was at the railway station and I wanted a newspaper. So I went to the newspaper vendor who was selling newspapers to everybody on the platform. And I asked him for a newspaper. And he happily took out a newspaper from his bundle and gave it to him. Now this man took out his wallet to pay 10 rupees for the newspaper. And this man, the rich person who was buying the newspaper, when he took out his wallet, he realized that he didn't have change. So he returned the newspaper to the vendor and he said that, I'm sorry, I don't have change. So I can't pay you for the newspaper. You can take your newspaper back. The vendor said, it's okay, sir. I'll give you the newspaper for free. So even though he could afford to pay him the entire amount, he chose to not pay for it. And somebody who did not have the means to even earn, say, 100 rupees or 500 rupees in a day, spent 10 rupees without having it. So you can be rich just by having a rich heart. You do not need to have lakhs and crores of money. It is something that flows from your nature, from your attitude, and from the sanskar and the traditions that we receive from our parents, from our families, and from the institution that you're all receiving education from. Okay, so moving ahead. I said the two factors that are going to be very important in your productive years ahead. First is your individual and personal growth. And second is your actions towards your society and your community. Now let's talk about personal growth first. It's important to talk about personal growth first because only an individual who grows personally is happy from within. And when you're happy from within, you are able to bring happiness to the world. You need to be intrinsically happy and motivated to spread joy to the world outside you. There are very small, simple ways through which I've derived happiness at my own personal level. And I would like to share those with you. And I earnestly hope that you would like to imbibe them. I'm sure most of you would already be doing these activities in your daily life. So, first thing is to have some sort of regime for physical activity, some physical exercise, any form that you like. It could be walking, jogging, running, dancing or jumping, doing yoga, aerobics. But some form of physical activity or the other is very important to keep you charged up, to keep your metabolism intact, to keep your stress levels at bay, and also to improve your concentration levels. You know, it also helps greatly in building your immunity levels of the body. And this pandemic has also amply demonstrated that people with higher levels of immunity are able to better fight the disease and its after effects. And immunity is basically a function of two things. One is your exercise, and the other is the food that we eat. Now, talking about food, eating a balanced and a nutritious diet is very important. And I'm sure all of you love junk food. I don't know whether you have too much of access to it or not. I hope you don't, but we all love junk food. It is important that we eat the right kind of food and we eat it in a balanced way. The timings are very important. And like Baba has said, that there is bliss or anand in every grain of food. So enjoy every bite and chew slowly. Eat as slowly as possible and enjoy every bite out of it. There are three things in food that I feel are particularly important for all of us. First is ghee. Now, ghee, 1 to 2 teaspoons. You know why? Because all the fat soluble vitamins in our body, they are able to get dissolved only when there is a fat soluble medium, and ghee is the best medium. So try to incorporate at least 1 to 2 teaspoons of pure, preferably cow ghee in your food, in your dal, sabzi, on your chapati, or in any form that you like. The second thing is jaggery. Now, jaggery, most of us would be aware that it is the richest source of iron in vegetarian food. And iron is particularly important for your blood, for your heart, for your kidneys, for your lungs, for everything. And the best part about jaggery is that it tastes better than sugar. So if you like to add sugar in your milk or in your curd, try to replace it with jaggery. It is far more healthy and it is indigenously available. It's best to have local form of jaggery in your diet. And the third thing, that's the final thing, that is my favorite fruit, which is banana. A banana is very rich in potassium, very good for digestion, and it has inherent multiple advantages. So when you feel hungry between your meals, say between your breakfast and lunch, or for some reason your meal is getting delayed because of your classes or for any particular activity that you may be busy in, having a banana really helps. It curbs your hunger in a healthy way. And the best part about banana is that it's locally available and it's available throughout the year. So the moment you feel hungry and you feel that you're stretching your arms towards that packet of chips or biscuit or anything, try to keep 3-4 bananas in your room. As a hostler, I always had bananas in my room. And in my office too, I always keep bananas. And the best part about banana is that even if you want to have 2, you can happily have it. You can have it on empty stomach. Like I said, you can have it in between your meals and you can have it even before sleeping. So 3 things for a healthy diet: ghee, jaggery, and banana. Please try to include them. And eat slowly. Now, we move from the stomach towards the mind and talk about a little about the brain. Enough of, I think, lunch cravings for now. I hope I would not be keeping you away from your lunch for too long, but let's talk about the mind now. So when we talk about the brain and the mind, the first thing that comes to my mind is questions. To keep asking questions to anybody and everybody around you. That fire of curiosity should always be alive, no matter how old you are. There should be endless questions in your mind. And you know something very interesting part about curiosity is that you don't necessarily have to have someone to ask or thrust those questions upon. Of course, you can torture your teachers and your gurus and mentors and friends and peers with endless questions. But in case you have nobody to ask, keep asking yourself and try to find the answers to improve your knowledge base and your information bank. You could Google, you could read, or you could, form discussion groups. So moving ahead from asking questions, the next most important thing is to read as much as you can. And it's not necessary that you read only academic things. Try to read whatever you love to read, whether it is books of humor or magazines or comics, or books on entertainment or suspense or thriller, or for that matter, even books on life skills and spirituality. You know, of late, I've started reading books on spirituality, especially books on Baba. And I remember when, as a teenager, I used to read Sai Satcharit. And then there was a gap when I was preparing for the civil services. I couldn't read much on Baba. And now I've started reading again. I derive so much of joy and happiness by reading those simple thoughts and trying to inculcate them in my daily life. So whatever you love to read or whatever you have at hand, please do read as much as you can in whatever time space that you have. Then, like I said, form discussion groups and try to identify problems that are affecting a large number of people and try to find simple and innovative solutions. You know, I'll give you an example. You would all have heard of this famous innovator, an educator called Sonam Wangchuk. He's from Ladakh. Have you heard of him? If you have, please raise your hands. Oh, okay. So have you heard of him because of that movie called Three Idiots, or because of his good work? Well, I'm sure I can't hear your voices, but either ways, I'm very happy to know that you have heard of him. You know, recently he did a very interesting thing. In Ladakh, there was this problem of water scarcity, and the government couldn't do much in a short span of time. You know, we're all bureaucrats, and we work very slow. We think slow, we act slow. So we need young boys and girls like you who are charged up on energy and enthusiasm. So Sonam Wangchuk, he came up with this brilliant concept of artificial glaciers. So he set up these huge ice stupas and he solved the problem of water scarcity in his region. And his model was emulated and it was replicated in different parts of the country. So try to, you know, identify problems and find common solutions, simple solutions to those problems. Coming to my last 2 points for personal growth. The first is meditation and dhyan. Whenever you can do, before sleeping or after waking up in the morning or between the day, whenever you have 10 to 15 minutes, just sit by yourself, think about, you know, your own self, your growth, whether you are moving in the right direction or not. Are people happy with your actions? That is dhyan. And try to meditate in the form of chanting or prayer or whatever manner you like. It will bring you a lot of inner peace and it will try to, you know, curb away the unnecessary things that are distracting us in life. You know, in our day of 24 hours, there are so many things that distract us and there are very few things that keep us concentrated. And it's important to reverse this ratio, to focus more time on the useful and constructive things and reduce the time on things that distract us. So dhyan and meditation are very helpful. And my very last point for personal growth, and this is my all-time favorite. I always like to tell, you know, my dear students about it and all the talks that I deliver, and that is gratitude. Gratitude, we all know, means thanking for every small thing that we have in life. Now, there's a very famous book called The Secret. There's a movie also made on it. And the author of the book, Rhonda Byrne, the moment you open the book, the very first page, you know, even before the foreword, there is a quote. She says that gratitude is something that the more you have gratitude in life, the more you will have things to be grateful for. It's such a beautiful thing that the more thankful we are for our small and big receivings, the more thankful we would be and we would receive more. So be grateful for everything that you have, even if it's a meal that you are looking forward to, it's a telephone call with your family, it's a favorite TV channel or a program that you are watching, or just the company of your friends. Be grateful for everything. Okay, so now let's move on to bringing joy to the world. Now that we are internally happy and that we found ways to be happy inside, let's try and spread this happiness from within to outside. I understand, I have been told that most of you, in fact, all of you, after completion of your studies, would be doing seva in one form or the other. And our country and its people desperately needs people like you, young boys and girls like you, who are ready to take forward this mission of helping others. Now, helping those people, especially who are at the margins, who have nobody to help, to receive help from. They could be the underprivileged, the aged, the disabled, poor women, and children. Generally, they are so distraught, and any programs to extend help to them reach towards the end because they are so much at the end of the ladder. But with boys and girls like you, I think they can be reached out much earlier because you have that connect with them. You come from rural communities. You are greater on compassion and on commitment in comparison to any other institution, particularly of government or authority. And I want to tell you that whatever efforts that you make in making a happier community, in bringing happiness to people, bringing more comfort to them, whatever efforts you make is going to make a huge, huge difference to their life because they've hardly been reached out to. And here you are, so young and charged up in your early 20s or maybe late 20s, and then you are in the villages trying to reach out to these people. You are going to bring in so much of satisfaction and joy to your own self as well. And Atma Shakti, like they say, when you help others, you increase your own Atma Shakti. So it's a win-win situation. It's not that you are doing a favor. Helping others should never be seen as doing a favor. It should only be seen as an opportunity to grow your own self personally and being more capable of spreading happiness to others. Because we are a part of that very community, very society. It's not that, the society or community is different and we are help givers or we are helpers, extending help. Someday or the other, you would also be helped by someone or the other who you would have helped, or maybe not, anybody in general. Some of the activities in which you can fruitfully engage yourself through community participation, particularly, are tree plantations. So I remember tree plantation was one of my very favorite experiences, very close to my heart, in one of my postings in Mathura. And I would quickly narrate my experience to you in short without boring you much. So we had a huge target of planting about 15 lakh saplings in 7 days' time. And Mathura is, is declared as a dark block. So dark block means that the groundwater has gone, groundwater table, the water has gone down much below than the groundwater table. And this is because of exploitative extraction practices of water. So we were given this target of growing plants so that they could hold on to the soil and the rainwater could seep down further. So through community participation, through the villagers themselves, we started sowing the saplings. And as we progressed, I was in charge of this entire mission. I was leading it. And as we progressed, my subordinates, my team members, they requested me that you please come and plant the first sapling in every field. And once you leave, we will plant the rest of the saplings. So I said that, okay, let me think about it. And then after a couple of minutes, I said that instead of coming and planting the first sapling, how about if I come and plant the last sapling? So they were a little puzzled. They said, last sapling? Because of course they knew that if I would come and plant the last sapling, then they would have to plant all the remaining saplings before I reach. And there could be no possibility of fudging up of the targets that, we are on paper showing that we've planted 1 lakh, but actually we've planted only 10,000. That's something which is quite common. But when you go and plant the last sapling, you have an opportunity to ensure two things. The first thing is that you are able to see that the number of saplings have all been sown. And secondly, you are able to make provisions for their care. Now, a sapling is like a small baby. You need to give it water, you need to give it sunlight, and you need to give it manuring. So when you go and plant the last sapling, you can see You can ensure that all these provisions for the sown saplings have been made or not. So you could, in your community participation activities, you could consider holding campaigns wherein you could identify lands and with the help of villagers themselves, because the benefits ultimately would accrue to them. So the more community participation is there, the easier your work will be, and there would be more belongingness. You could consider water harvesting, like I spoke about Sonam Wangchuk. Now, water bodies, cleaning of water bodies is also something that you could consider, especially in rural areas. There are small water bodies like lakes, ponds, riverbeds, which are not cleaned very often, and they are breeding grounds for diseases, viruses, and infections. So if you could consider campaigns in that particular sector, it would play a very important role in bringing in hygiene and at the same time good health to the villagers. And in turn, it would save so much of money that would have been otherwise spent on being treated by doctors, on having medicines and the like. You all are aware that electricity is a problem in villages. Down south, in your state, it is definitely much better. But here towards the north, villages are not that fortunate in terms of receiving electricity. So you could consider the area of solar energy. You could have solar lights, street lights. They are very economical and they can be done through community participation. I presume that you are all social entrepreneurs in making, and I've been told that you are already engaged in community seva. You do activities like organizing medical camps, organizing already social entrepreneurs in making, and solar energy is something that you could think on. Now, computer literacy. Computer literacy is something that just by having one computer, you can impart education to at least 20, 30 young boys and girls in the villages. They have never been exposed to this particular technology, and through you, they can gain so much of knowledge and match with the fast pace of time that this world is witnessing. Adult literacy is another very important area, because and schemes to cater to education of children, education of the girl child to young children. But unfortunately, for people who've missed the bus early in life, for whatever reasons, for want of pressures, or for whatever reasons they could not complete their education, considering adult literacy could be very meaningful and very satisfying. And it could also help them secure better means of livelihood. And on the lines of adult literacy, you could also consider vocational training and education, especially for those young boys and girls who couldn't complete formal schooling. And by thinking on vocational education, you could help them secure better means of earning money for them and their families. But the underlying principle, the most important principle behind any activity that you do, whether it's community activity, community seva, or your own internal growth, whether it is reading a book or preparing for your studies or playing a game of sports, there is one underlying theme which is common and which I want to tell you, and which I believe that you all are living and breathing, especially by being part of this University for Human Excellence. And that is, this underlying theme is the spirit of excellence. In whatever activity that you do, that spirit of excellence is what is most important. In fact, the spirit of excellence is what gives you the real joys of life. If that spirit of excellence is there, you enjoy everything, and you derive immense benefits for yourself and for those people who you're trying to help. So please keep that spirit intact of being excellent in anything that you do, whether it is small or big. And one more important thing, taking the task to completion is very important. It's very natural that we may face challenges, we may face obstacles, we may face limited resources or problems of different kind. And we may get demotivated and leave our task midway. but don't do that, please. That is what excellence is all about, not leaving your task midway, being consistent and taking it to its logical end. And I wish all of you lots of good health and happiness and lots of good luck in all the endeavors that you do. There is a beautiful quote by Dalai Lama, which I would like to, say here. He has said that this planet doesn't need, more successful people. We already have many successful people. What this planet needs is young boys and girls like you, who can be peacemakers, who can be healers, who can be storytellers, and who can be lovers of all kinds. So my good luck and my prayers for all of you. And there is a short video. This video I had come across about 3 years ago, and I find it very heart-touching. It shows how a small boy is able to solve a big problem to which nobody is able to find solution of. So everybody is, troubled by this problem, but nobody is able to find solution. And this small boy is able to find a solution. He is small in his size, in his age, and his resources. He has nothing except a school bag on his shoulders. And it's raining heavily. And everybody is criticizing that, oh my God, we are stuck. This problem is so big. I don't want to, tell you in too much detail because I want you to enjoy the video also. But at the same time, I also want to tell you the background about it, because it's an old video and the clarity of the video, the resolution is not very good. But what I have done is that I have added subtitles in English as the video would progress. It's a short 2-minute video only. So please do read the subtitles. And the lyrics are beautiful. The music is very nice. The video is a bit hazy, but the boy is full on energy, like all of you. And I hope you enjoy it. And I look forward to interacting with you, receiving few questions, like I have been told, post this video. So I would request you to kindly play the video, please.
Take questions. Yeah. Sarah ma'am, can we play the video in the end and have questions now? Since we have circulated video in WhatsApp, they will play it offline.
All right. So can we, for the benefit of the students here, can we play for them and play it again in the end, or you'd like to play it later only?
We'll play in the end after the question and answer session.
Okay.
The questions I'm typing in the chat box. So.
Okay. Okay, so I see the first question. It says, what does it take to become a national leader? What was your commitment behind achieving your aim? So my compliments to whosoever has asked this question. It's a brilliant question and rather difficult to answer as well, but I hope to do justice to it, drawing from my own learnings and experiences. So what does it take to become a national leader? I think it's very easy. To become a national leader, it's easy, but to actually work towards it is a lot more difficult. But the one thing that is very important is the love for your nation, the love for the people of this nation, the love for the need to bring happiness to their lives. Like I said, that, we need boys and girls like you who can bring happiness and smile and joy to the lives of others. And by wanting to become a national leader, you need not necessarily have to be a part of an institution, a government institution, or an institution of authority. You need not have to have too many resources. A national leader is somebody who thinks that he or she is himself the biggest resource. You need to identify your own strength, your talent, your potential, and channelize it towards the welfare of the people. I think it's very easy. The love for your nation and the capability to identify your strengths and to move in the right direction. But of course, it's a challenging task in terms of, the struggle that you will have to put in. It's easy to identify how to solve a problem, but actually solving the problem takes a lot more, time and energy. So patience, of course, is very important. And there was another sub part to the question. I've received two more, but I'd like to answer the sub part, which was, what was your commitment behind achieving your aim? My commitment was that I wanted to do something in which I could make a difference to the lives of others. And that is something that drove me towards preparing for the civil services exam, towards being a part of the civil services, and towards being, charged up and enthusiastic even today, in spite of having faced quite a few hurdles in personal and professional life. The desire to bring bliss to others, to myself, the desire to make a difference to others is what has been, driving me through. Okay, so the next question I would like to move ahead to. It says, you are fearless and you have brought many good changes in the country. What is your source of this fearlessness, and how do you get this courage to take these decisions? Okay. Courage is something. Fearlessness, of course, when we are successful and, people ask you who was the source of motivation, we always like to thank our parents and family. And that is what gratitude is all about. My parents have played a very important role. But at the same time, and God, of course, has been very kind. But at the same time, I want to tell you that courage is something which comes from within. Because even though you may have a supportive family, you may have siblings, you may have parents who are supportive, but to sustain that courage and fearlessness, you need to be very strong. You need to have a very, very strong willpower that no matter what you do, you will be prepared to face the consequences as long as you are doing the right thing. So in my journey, I experienced this, that when I started, I was all alone. There was nobody, in terms of institutional support per se. And I was all alone, but I was very strong on my conviction, whether I'm doing the right thing or not. Your conviction towards your principles and your thought is very important. If you're strong on your conviction, you'll soon realize that people start supporting you. And there becomes a huge caravan of people who are following you and encouraging you and appreciating your efforts. That internal conviction is very important. I think that is what keeps me going. Now, the next question is, Sai Ram, ma'am. Sai Ram, can you narrate an experience of joy on philanthropic work? I just did during my initial talk about this particular rich man who said that, somebody who spent 10 rupees without having those 10 rupees was far more philanthropic than, than that man who had much more money than he did. Out of my own personal experience, I would like to share that I was posted in Kanpur, and we used to construct these toilets in rural areas for villagers under the Swachh Bharat Abhiyan that you all would be aware of. Now, government gives money to construct toilets, and with a small contribution by the beneficiary. So approximately it's 10,000 rupees. It was during those days. So 9,000 was given by the government and 1,000 came from the beneficiary himself. So we realized that we were bang on, in terms of accomplishing our targets, and all our toilets were in place. But the problem was that nobody was using these toilets. When I used to go to the villages, I used to see that there used to be locks placed outside the doors of the toilets. And I used to say that, what is this? Why have you are these treasuries or are these toilets? You please open the lock and show me what is inside. So then when we used to get the lock opened, I used to see that, the toilet there used to be no, those Indian toilet seat, and there used to be ghee canisters. I don't know what do you call canister in English? Those big 10 liter, 20 liter, cans of ghee. In villages, people tend to take the ghee from the cow milk and store it. And they used to use these toilets as storage rooms. So I said, what is this happening? We are constructing toilets and you're not using them. So it was very funny, but it was very distressing at the same time that, we are doing so much, we're spending so much, and the actual purpose is not getting fulfilled. That is, what I also said, that the impact of your contribution has on the lives of others. So mere construction of these structures was not enough. The ultimate mission was that there should be improvement in the hygiene levels of the villagers. There should be reduced expenditure on diseases, on medicines, and there should be considerable noticeable improvement in the health of the individual members of those households. So I asked them that why you are not using the toilets. So they said that we feel that they pollute the water, the groundwater, and which is pulled out using the hand pumps for, cooking, domestic use, drinking. So we feel that the use of these toilets contaminates the groundwater. We had rural psyche is very difficult. It's much easier for you to understand, but for urban people like us, it's very difficult to fathom. So, we tried to explain to the villagers, but they wouldn't understand. They said, no, madam, we will not use. And we know that our water is getting contaminated. So what we tried to do, we tried to engage philanthropic people. So I appointed preraks. Prerak is a word in Hindi. In English, it means motivators. It comes from the word prerna. That word also reminds me of a very, very dear relative. So prerna means motivation, and prerak is somebody who imparts motivation. We identified these people. They could be retired teachers. They could be senior aged people who were revered in the villages. They could be women who were called like bhabi and didi in the villages, who the other ladies would listen to. Nurses, the auxiliary midwives. So we identified them and we asked them, we requested them that you please tell the villagers that there is no such problem. It never contaminates. The toilet structure is such that in one tank there is, excreta which gets stored. In the other tank, it gradually gets flushed, and it has absolutely no interface with your groundwater. And they were able to explain to the villagers in a much more meaningful way than we could. And gradually we noticed a very visible change in the use of those toilets. And I was happy that, in my next round of visits, there used to be locks not hanging, outside the doors of the toilets. So people had, meaningfully started using them. The next question is, how did the spirit of excellence help you overcome challenges? Again, I would, repeat what I said, that when you have the spirit of excellence, you don't get bothered by the obstacles that come your way. There's a story about Arjun in Mahabharata that you're all aware of, that when Guru Dronacharya said to Arjun that you have to hit the bird's eye, and he, pulled his arrow, and, he made a very precise shot, and he hit right in the center of the eye. And then the Guru asked him that, how come your shot did not go even 1 inch left, right, or send, up or below the target? How come you hit the eye and you did not, hit any other part of the bird? So Arjun said that because I couldn't see the bird, I could only see the eye, and I hit what I saw. So if you just see your goal, you will not see the problems around you, which are bound to be there, but you will not be dissuaded by them. Your spirit of excellence will make you be focused on your target, and that is which will drive you towards happiness, joy, and success. I think all my stories are coming out one after the other today, and they all range from, what I tell to little children, to college students, to university students. So I hope that, I'm able to make some meaningful sense to you. Sai Ram, we have 3-semester exclusive course on integrated rural development. What, according to you, are the first steps in implementing for bringing changes in rural areas? Do you recommend any book on rural development or case study, or any documentary in this regard? Okay, so a book, I'm not so sure whether I will be able to recommend, because I think I'll have to go through what has been the latest publications in this regard. But definitely the first steps which you should keep in mind for bringing changes in rural areas, first thing is walk the ground. So walk the ground means go and meet people. Generally, what happens is in government offices, I'm telling you from my experience, we keep sitting in our office, we don't meet people, and we just depend on what our people come and tell us, what our subordinates tell us, that this is the problem there, that is the problem there, or the public in general who come and tell us. We never go to the ground. If we go to the ground and talk to the people directly, we'll understand, where the shoe hurts the most, where it pinches the most, and we will try to nail the problem at that one particular point, because we would have improved understanding of the problem. And when you have a better understanding of the problem, you can find better solutions. You talk to people, take their suggestions, and then solve the problem. You will be able to proceed in a very, very constructive and fruitful manner. That is one thing. Second thing is mid-course correction. That is, follow-up and feedback. So if you're doing something for the rural communities, to keep checking on regular intervals whether your actions are going in the right direction or not is very important. Generally, what we do is that, after having implemented the scheme for 3, 4, 5 months, 6 months, that is when we, try to do some kind of an audit. And by that time, we've lost money, we've lost time, and we've lost resources. So it's very important that in 15, 20 days, we keep visiting the area where we are, bringing in different programs for rural development and see whether they are actually making a difference to people or not. So like I said, suggested with my example of toilets, had we been satisfied with the fact that our toilets have been constructed, there was nothing more to do further. But I think that was not the end. The completion of target is never the end. It's always the beginning, because that is when you start seeing whether your targets are leading you to the intended results or not. Result is more important rather than target people. The second is, see, you all are going to have people who will be helping you in your mission. They could be villagers through community participation. There could be your institute. So leading them by example is very important, and empowering them. When I say empowering, I mean to say that whatever you do, the credit of your good work should not be limited to you. It should be given to those people who are a part of your mission, whether they are the villagers or your own people, because that is when the real belongingness and ownership of any activity comes. That is when people feel from within that, yes, they want to become a part of this initiative. And particularly in rural areas, it's very important to bring the villagers into the fold of your campaign so that they feel committed to the cause, and they are make them, you are the master leader and you make them as new leaders. They feel empowered and they spread your mission and take it forward. So those are the 3 things. The next question is, the pandemic has created panic. Definitely, P for pandemic, and panic is common to both the words, and gloomy situation all around. Do you suggest any activities to bring back the positivity in society, especially among the youth, as many of them have become directionless? Okay, so yes, definitely, it has brought in a lot of stress, a lot of confusion and uncertainty. People don't know what to do, especially for the youngsters, because they are in different phases of their academic careers. Many people have lost their jobs because companies are downsizing. How to stay positive is very important. And I think the first thing that we need to tell ourselves to stay positive is that this pandemic is not going to be there forever. It's certainly stretched for a very long time. We had not presumed that the second wave would come, and that too in such a in a disastrous form, but it would be over one day. You need to keep reminding yourself that this will pass. This is the only thing that can keep you motivated. And amidst this uncertainty, the little certainties that you can try to bring, that will also help you, bringing your positivity levels higher. And that is some kind of a routine or a timetable is very important, because most of us are sitting at home, or sitting in confined places. We are not moving out. So if we have some kind of a timetable, we wake up at a particular time, do our dhyan or meditation or early morning activity in the form of exercise, eat nutritious meals, look forward to cooking your own healthy meals, eating them on time, discussing, spending time with your family. Perhaps this time you will never get again in your life. Let's hope and pray that there will not be another pandemic. So this pandemic has given us the opportunity to spend time with our family, to do creative things, to read more books, to plan more our future, to focus on our physical activities, on our health. The moment this pandemic gets over, we'll all get very busy in things that we were doing earlier. So make use of this time and try and stay positive. Do those things which you enjoy doing, whether it is reading a book or it is playing or listening to good music. Do whatever you like, but try to follow a timetable. It's not that today for the, let's say, a major part of the day you are doing something and tomorrow you don't know what to do. If you have a timetable, you will be able to constructively utilize your time. Okay, the next question says, Sai Ram, loving Sai Ram, how do you manage your fight between mind and heart? Okay, during decision making, be it small or big. Okay, I don't know. I always feel that there is no difference between the mind and heart. They're all the same thing. If you are sure on your principles, your mind and heart will never tell you separate things. At least it has not happened with me. I mean, that internal conflict, thankfully, I have been fortunate that my mind and heart have never been into two separate directions. I don't even know whether the mind resides at a different place and the heart resides at a different place or not. For me, they are both one. And they fortunately have fallen in place. I think they like to cooperate with each other because they don't want to face my wrath. And the way to reduce conflicts between your mind and heart is to be very strong on what you want to do in life. That clarity, if you have, then there will be very little scope for confusion. So try to be clear, and clarity is something that will really help us. Okay, this is a question from a faculty. What was your reaction when you were suspended from the post? Did you lose hope of being an IAS officer? Okay. So I think this should be the last question, because I don't see any more questions after this. And we are also towards the conclusion of the 1 hour time that you all had graciously spared for me today. So what was my instant reaction? I will tell you. And what was my long reaction? I would also like to tell you quickly. When I got to know I was suspended, and this was very late in the night, it was past 12. And I was told telephonically that I have been suspended. And I said, what? I mean, I was absolutely surprised because I was only 9 months into service. It was my very first year of service. I had not even completed 1 year. And I had perhaps not even known what the word suspension means. So I was completely puzzled and, slightly amused. That is somebody joking with me. So that particular person who said, who called me and said that I've been suspended, he told me that if I don't believe him, I should switch on the news channel and, see it for myself. So the local news channel of, those times, I switched it on, and there was a news going at the bottom of the screen. And it said that, with my name, it said that I have been suspended. And I was so shocked. I said, how can this be possible? Because whatever I have done has been absolutely in the spirit of the Constitution and absolutely within the, definitions of law. There is nothing that I have done wrong. So first of all, it was a lot of disbelief and doubt in the decision. I thought that maybe they've, written my name wrongly and there should be somebody else's name. So it took me good 12 to 14 hours to convince myself that yes, I have been suspended. I was trying to still verify that whether it's actually me or not. So that was my initial reaction. Then the second reaction, when I was finally sure that yes, I have been suspended, definitely there was the thunderstorm inside me. I was angry, but I wouldn't say that I panicked. There's a difference between being angry and being panicky. Because why I was angry was because I knew that I've not done anything wrong. And I was angry that why should this decision be taken without, I being asked for an explanation. And if my good work is being treated in this way, then what will happen to so many other people, who are trying to do good work in their own areas? So I was very angry. But gradually, as the days passed, because this suspension battle lasted for about good 45 days. So as the days passed, I became more resilient, more patient, more strong from within, because I knew that this is a battle which I had to fight at my own level. I had tremendous support from everybody. I mean, from people I've never met, or perhaps I would never meet in my entire, life. I had support from everybody. But ultimately, this was a battle which I had to fight myself. And I knew that by being patient and by being strong from within was the only way out. I mean, by being panicky, by being anxious, by being distressed, there was no solution. I had only option of being, strong and patient and resilient. And this battle, in fact, taught me a lot, in a very short span of time. Something that I faced in less than 1 year of service has taught me something that I would have learned after 10 years of service. That kind of maturity, that kind of resilience. I mean, I learned that what can be worse in service? There's nothing worse than this. So when you've seen the worst, you get prepared for everything under the sun. Now, I always feel grateful. And to Baba, I extend my gratitude that I've seen those days as well. He has been kind enough to, show me difficult times at an early stage in life and make me more prepared, as life progresses. So thank you very much, everybody. I hope we had an enjoyable discussion today. And I wish each one of you happier and healthier times ahead.
Thank you, ma'am. Baba always says that his students should have three things. That is head of Shankara, heart of Gautam Buddha, hands of Janaka. You have summarized all three things. Actually, as you said, head of Shankara, we should have clarity in life. If we have clarity in life, then we'll not have conflict of mind and heart, as you rightfully said, and heart of Buddha. If we are internally peaceful, if we are internally joyful, as you said in your TED talk recently and also in this talk, no work is an hard work. It just happens. Activities just happens. And hands of Janaka, that we should always help, especially the youth of, especially the graduates of this university should involve themselves in the social benefit. It was a wonderful talk and it was a live example. And we are thankful to our Vikas sir, who is a part of our Satya Sai family, for connecting us with you. It was a fruitful talk. You were a live example for all our boys and girls. They also aspire to become like you and have your spirit of excellence when they graduate and when they are posted in different villages. And your inputs on adult literacy rate, computer literacy, cleaning of water bodies, these are very wonderful inputs. We will try to implement it in our integrated rural development program, which we have for 3 semesters. And with the grace of Baba, let our institution has spread across different villages of Karnataka. As with the grace of Baba, let these institution become a nodal points for villages, for rural people, as you said, underprivileged people, for development. Thank you, one and all. Thank you, ma'am, from all of us on the behalf of all students and staff. Sairam. We will pray.
Thank you very much. You've beautifully summarized the entire discussion.
Yes,
and thank you very much to Vikas sir for having me here today and for giving me this opportunity to interact with my future leaders, our country's future leaders. And yes, looking forward to the video now, please. Thank you.
We will play the video offline, ma'am. And
all right. Please enjoy the video. Thank you.
We will end this session with a prayer. Sahana Bhavatu prayer.
Right.
Sahana Bhavatu, Sahano Bhunaktu, Sahaviryam Karavavahai, Tejasvinavaditamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om
शांति शांति शांति।
Thank you, ma'am. Saira.